We're over halfway through 2026 and we thought that it would be useful to do a roundup of all of the latest OLED panel news that we've seen this year, with loads of new panels and information since our last updates that we published earlier on. We also saw loads of news from both Samsung Display's QD-OLED and LG Display's WOLED technology at COMPUTEX 2026 in June, and we've now started to see the first panels produced by new rival TCL CSOT in the OLED monitor space as well. We're primarily talking here about the underlying OLED panels being developed, but we'll also touch on the monitors that we know about so far that feature these new panels and cover some common questions about potential future developments too. Let's start with the latest WOLED plans from LG Display, where there were a range of really exciting new updates, and we'll start with the smallest size and work up from there. First up was the world's first small form factor OLED monitor panel, measuring in at 24.5 inches in size and specifically designed with competitive and esports gamers in mind. It's got a 1080p resolution and a 540Hz refresh rate, making it very well suited to this market, offering high frame rate support and amazing motion clarity. Interestingly, this is also the first WOLED technology monitor panel to feature the higher tier Display HDR True Black 600 certification, requiring another bump in HDR brightness compared with previous OLED monitors that have been released. It's only actually in the last year or so that we started to see the jump from True Black 400 to 500, which is becoming more common with the latest generation of panels. But this new 24.5 inch size panel offers that additional boost to HDR 600. This panel still uses LG Display's Tandem WOLED panel technology, and the brightness improvements are thanks to the lower pixel density on offer here and pushing the panel brightness further as well. It's great to see another step forward in OLED monitor brightness, and we'll look forward to this hopefully filtering through to the larger panel sizes in the future too. LG Display will offer this panel with a matte anti-glare and a glossy coating version option, as they've done with their other panels this year. But so far the only monitor that we've seen announced featuring this new panel is a model from ASUS, which was announced and showcased at COMPUTEX in June, which uses the glossy version of the panel. No other manufacturers have announced any monitors using this new panel yet, but we expect others will follow at some point. We talked more about the use cases for this new small-sized OLED panel, how it might compare with competing TN film and IPS LCD panels of this size, and where you might start to see a real benefit in this panel in our ASUS coverage from COMPUTEX. So you can find links to our video and also our written roundup below for more information on that. Next up is a new panel that was unveiled by LG Display at SID Display Week in May, and also on show at COMPUTEX in Taiwan in June. This is a new 27-inch sized Tandem WOLED panel with an even higher pixel density than is available now of 5K. This will be the highest density monitor OLED panel produced so far, with what Apple would refer to as a Retina class resolution, approximately 220 ppi, and it features an RGB striped subpixel layout, which we believe is probably a necessity in production at these kind of densities anyway. The refresh rate is listed as 120Hz at 5K, but there's no word on whether a dual mode function will be supported at this time for 1440p gaming. Due to the increased pixel density and the removal of the white subpixel from the panel design, this one will have a lower brightness spec, with 250 nits for SDR and True Black 400 certification for HDR. Given the lower refresh rate for this panel and the super high pixel density, we expect this will be primarily aimed at the professional segment initially. Perhaps it could make a great choice for a future Apple monitor where the 5K resolution and Retina class pixel density are well suited to Mac OS systems. LG Display's other newly produced 27-inch and 32-inch 4K panels that we'll talk about in a moment have a more consumer-friendly spec, including a higher native refresh rate and dual mode function for gaming, but perhaps in time we might see this 27-inch 5K panel evolve, and hopefully at some point we might even see a spec that could rival the current wave of 5K dual mode LCD monitors that are being launched at the moment, as those offer a great combination for both professional and productivity uses and for gaming. Right now this panel is in prototype form from LG Display and it's pending adoption by any monitor manufacturer, so no actual screens have been announced so far featuring it. Next up are two newly announced 32-inch sized panels offering a 4K resolution and 240Hz native refresh rate, along with a dual mode function supporting 480Hz at a lower 1080p resolution for certain gaming situations. This WOLED panel spec was actually released first back in 2024, but this year the panel is being given the Tandem WOLED refresh, offering improved brightness, colours and contrast compared with the earlier generation panels. We've already compared Tandem WOLED at length with earlier gen WOLED panels in our reviews of the 27-inch panels that are already available, but this will be the first 32-inch sized panel using this latest tech. There's actually two versions of this 32-inch panel being released. The first we heard about in January at CES, when LG Electronics announced a new ultra gear monitor that will feature it. Although that wasn't actually on show at the event for some reason, and they also weren't at COMPUTEX in June. That model has started though to become available and released in some regions now, with wider rollout expected during the summer. At COMPUTEX more recently, both ASUS and Gigabyte announced new upcoming monitors that will use this same panel. It uses a traditional RGWB subpixel layout, so it keeps the white subpixel, and offers display HDR 500 true black certification and a peak brightness spec of 1500 nits. The HDR specs are a step up from the earlier gen WOLED panels of this size, and ASUS and Gigabyte will use the glossy screen coating version, while LG Electronics have opted to use the matte anti-glare version for their model. That gives users a good choice though in this segment. Interestingly, LG Display will also be producing a second variation of this 32-inch 4K panel, this time with an RGB striped subpixel layout. The removal of the white subpixel is done to eliminate any remaining visible fringing and improve text and image sharpness for those who are particularly sensitive to those kind of issues. On the flip side though, removing the white subpixel does have a trade-off in panel brightness, with this panel version reaching the lower True Black 400 tier for HDR and offering a peak brightness of 1000 nits instead of 1500 nits. SDR brightness also drops from 335 nits to 250 nits with this panel, so there's a consideration here between pushing brightness for multimedia and gaming on the RGWB version, or balancing text clarity and sharpness with the RGB stripe layout. This follows on from their 27-inch 4K resolution panel that was unveiled at CES in January, which also offers an RGB stripe layout and similar specs to this 32-inch panel. So far we've only seen two models announced in the 27-inch sized featuring that RGB striped Tandem WOLED panel, and one model in the new 32-inch size. ASUS have models available in both sizes, and they've elected to use the glossy panel coating version of those panels. LG Display have said that the panels are now in mass production, and monitor availability is expected during July-August, depending on your region. You can find loads more coverage and hands-on with the new ASUS and Gigabyte 32-inch Tandem WOLED screens from COMPUTEX in our videos linked below. And if you want to know loads more about RGB stripe OLED panels, their pros and cons, and a summary of all of the known and future panels with this pixel layout, check out our recent article, also linked below. What about the ultra-wide panel market? It's not that long ago actually that we saw the first 39-inch ultra-wide monitor announced with a new Tandem WOLED panel and a so-called 5K 2K resolution, and we reviewed a model from LG Electronics earlier in the year which uses that panel. It's got a more subtle 1500R curvature compared with earlier panels of this size from LG Display, and a 165Hz native refresh rate with dual mode support for 330Hz at a lower resolution if you need it. That's an excellent new panel and a great combination of resolution, pixel density and size. It's got 1500 nits peak brightness for HDR and certification under the True Black 500 tier. We've only seen that panel utilised in one monitor so far from LG, where the matte anti-glare coating version of the panel was selected. At COMPUTEX 2026, a second version of this panel was also unveiled and adopted by Dell for their new Alienware display. It's got the same 5K 2K resolution, the same refresh rate, same curvature, but the differences are that this new panel will offer a glossy screen coating, and for the first time it will also offer an RGB stripe subpixel layout as well. This offers the same improvements in text clarity that we discussed earlier as well for the 27-inch and 32-inch panels, and in this instance only small sacrifices in brightness it seems, with a 1300 nits peak for HDR and True Black 500 certification still achieved. Only Dell have announced a monitor using this glossy RGB stripe version of the panel so far in the 39-inch 5K 2K space. We're definitely looking forward to checking that out and testing it later in the year at some point soon when it's available. You can find loads more coverage again and hands-on with this screen from COMPUTEX in our Dell video that's linked below. That's all the new and announced WOLED panels from LG Display right now, but we did visit them while we were in Taiwan at COMPUTEX as well, and we've got a separate video below which explores other new panel developments like a prototype True Black 1000 capable panel, new coating options for future panels, and the return of panel-driven black frame insertion. So check that video out below if you want to learn loads more about LG Display's other panel news. Before we move on to Samsung Display's QD-OLED updates, let's talk about a new OLED panel newcomer, TCL CSOT, a manufacturer who have been around for a long while making LCD panels for monitors and have over a decade of experience in R&D for OLED in other segments like mobile, laptop and automotive. They're now exploring monitor OLED panels as well, so an alternative to the current dominance from LG Display and Samsung Display, leading the way with their new inkjet printing or IJP process. That promises in the long run to improve production efficiency and volume and hopefully bring down costs, which should then hopefully eventually flow through to cheaper end user products. Their first panel to be produced is a 27-inch size panel with a 4K resolution, an RGB striped subpixel layout and 120Hz refresh rate, along with 99% DCI-P3 color gamut and True Black 500 certification for HDR. That panel has been adopted so far by MSI for a newly announced model in their Pro Max range, largely because of the RGB stripe layout and comparatively low refresh rate, although confirmation of release date and pricing is still pending. We'll definitely be interested to see further competition and development in this OLED monitor space, and we're seeking further information from TCL CSOT about future OLED plans. So do hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date on that when we've got more information to share. Let's move on now to Samsung Display's competing QD-OLED technology. And there's been a couple of new panels launched or announced recently. A reminder, the generational naming scheme is our own here, as Samsung Display abandoned that a couple of years ago, but we think that it helps distinguish the technologies and changes well. And you'll see many monitor manufacturers also adopt the same. Again, we'll start with the smallest size and work upwards from there. First up is the first 27-inch 1440p resolution panel to shift to their new and latest Penta Tandem QD-OLED panel technology, incorporating their 5-layer structure and EL 3.0 material that has been featured on their Gen 4 and Gen 5 panels in recent times. This is the first time that this updated and improved panel technology has been used on a 27-inch 1440p resolution panel though. It's got a 320Hz refresh rate as well, so that's a little bit lower than their earlier gen panels of this size that reached 360Hz and 500Hz even. This updated 5-layer structure though does bring with it some improvements in brightness, with True Black 500 certification and 1300 nits peak brightness for HDR. The first time actually that we've seen that higher peak brightness spec on any panel other than their latest 34-inch ultrawide panel that was released in January. Everything else before it had a 1000 nits peak brightness spec, and this 27-inch 1440p panel remains with a triangular layout of subpixels. It's not shifted yet to an RGB stripe layout, unfortunately, but there's good improvements in brightness and panel longevity with the latest OLED material and structure. This new panel will also offer the quantum black film option that their latest 2026 panels have included, marketed under various different brand names by monitor manufacturers, but a decent addition which helps improve ambient light handling, black depth and contrast in well-lit rooms. It also improves panel hardness and scratch resistance too. We've only seen one monitor announced so far featuring this new 27-inch 1440p panel, and that's a model from MSI in their MAG series, but we expect others to follow this year as it's a popular segment. We would classify this panel as 4th gen QD-OLED by the way, as it doesn't feature the RGB stripe update, but it does use their latest Penta Tandem QD-OLED structure. More exciting though, we think, was the announcement of the world's first 32-inch 4K resolution OLED monitor panel with a 360Hz refresh rate, the first time that we've seen a jump at this resolution from the wide range of 240Hz panels that have come before. Not only is there a refresh rate jump, but this marks the first time that QD-OLED panels will feature a True Black 600 certification as well. It also comes with a higher peak brightness spec and supports a dual mode function, or in fact in this case a triple mode function. We'd classify this panel as 5th gen Penta Tandem QD-OLED as it also features an RGB striped subpixel layout, improving text clarity and reducing fringing compared with their earlier, already very good 32-inch 4K panels. The quantum black film is available again as an option as it is on their other 2026 panels, and we talked about the True Black 600 certification earlier for LG Display's 24.5-inch WOLED panel, but this is the first time that we've seen this certification for a QD-OLED monitor panel, having only really actually recently just seen True Black 500 panels released. So far we've seen one monitor announced already with this panel, which will offer a 1500 nits peak brightness spec as well. That's some great improvements in brightness even compared with the new wave of True Black 500 panels that are being released. This is the first QD-OLED panel as well to be produced that offers a dual mode support, in fact allowing for triple mode in the case of this panel, and that means you can run it at 4K 360Hz native, or if you want to prioritize higher frame rates, you can lower your resolution to 1440p at 520Hz or 1080p at 680Hz, so that gives you a massive choice for different gaming scenarios. This also offers the fastest refresh rate so far of 680Hz for 1080p gaming that we've seen so far. You can find slightly higher refresh rates of 720Hz from WOLED panels, but only in dual mode at very low 720p resolutions. Samsung Display say that the combination of 4K and 360Hz was technically challenging, but made possible by optimizing the panel's internal circuitry and drive systems. MSI have announced a monitor using this new panel at COMPUTEX, which looks amazing, and this is a super impressive spec that we can't wait to check out, although it's not expected to be available until Q1 2027 at the earliest. We may see more news of this screen and perhaps others at Gamescom at the end of August, and of course at CES in January. In larger panel sizes from Samsung Display, we should discuss the 34-inch ultrawide market as well. We won't go back over the 5th gen Penta Tandem QD-OLED panel that was launched in January in much detail, as we've already covered that in a lot of detail in the past, and we've now reviewed several monitors that are featuring it. It's worth noting though that while the initial models released from the likes of Asus and MSI that we reviewed featured a 360Hz refresh rate, in more recent times we've seen Samsung Display offer a lower 280Hz refresh rate version of the panel, which allows for a lower cost monitor to be released. We've now reviewed Dell's new Alienware model using the 280Hz panel, for instance, which provides all the same panel updates and developments, just with a lower refresh rate and lower retail price. Another interesting development in the 34-inch space was unveiled at COMPUTEX, and that is the first flat format 34-inch ultrawide panel to be produced. It's using the latest 5th gen Penta Tandem technology. It's got an RGB stripe layout again and True Black 500 certification, but the differences here are that it has a flat screen format instead of curved. Normally these panels are 1800R curvature and a lower 144Hz refresh rate. MSI have announced a monitor using this panel in their Pro Max lineup, opting to take the optional quantum black coating which they call dark armor film, as well as Samsung Display's other optional new anti-glare low reflection coating as well. Given that this is a model aimed at the professional market, that certainly makes sense. That anti-glare coating is an option Samsung Display are now offering across their 2026 and future panels, should monitor manufacturers want to use it. We should also talk here about a new budget-friendly, affordable QD-OLED panel technology that is already in production and being expanded this year. You may have seen this adopted by some manufacturers in some lower cost OLED monitors. It's referred to as QD-OLED Edge internally. This has been created based on display manufacturer demand, looking to make OLED more affordable and open up the opportunity for more people to experience OLED at a reasonable price point. Our understanding of QD-OLED Edge is that a few changes have been made to the manufacturing process, such as shifting from a 2 PCB to a 1 PCB design for a slimmer panel and in some cases utilising previous gen EL material as well. Basically, these panels are cheaper to produce and can then be incorporated into entry-level OLED monitors. In the past, we've already seen 27-inch 1440p panels of this type produced and various monitors released. And in that instance, it basically looks like they've tweaked the panel performance from their original Gen 3 panel that was released in 2024, using the same OLED material, but with a slightly lower spec. One notable spec change is that these panels do not offer the so-called Peak 1000 type HDR mode, instead generally supporting up to only 400 nits peak brightness in HDR, and offering, it seems, a mode that is basically equivalent or similar to the existing True Black 400 modes that we've seen on all of the QD-OLED monitors in the past, although these don't actually carry the VESA certification because of a more limited full screen brightness and SDR brightness of 200 nits as well. You'll probably be familiar with the challenges with panel dimming anyway with the Peak 1000 modes, being able to push up to a peak brightness of 1000 nits in some instances, but often looking darker in real content than the True Black 400 mode anyway. The loss of a peak mode may be less important on these anyway, but that's one of the changes with these new QD-OLED Edge panels. Samsung Display say that the lower brightness performance is aimed more at people who game and watch movies and multimedia in a dimly lit room, as opposed to a brighter room condition. We suspect that there's also an element here of trying to balance lifespan and burn-in risks, as with the retail prices being even lower, there's not much room to accommodate returns or warranty claims for that kind of thing. Being more conservative with the brightness output reduces that risk and helps keep costs lower. You can already find various models available using these 27-inch QD-OLED Edge panels. Look out for the 400 nits peak brightness for HDR as a good indication of this panel type being used specifically. In a larger size, we've also more recently seen a 32-inch 4K QD-OLED Edge panel announced at COMPUTEX, with MSI showcasing the first monitor to market with that panel. It's got a 4K resolution and 180Hz refresh rate, so a bit more of a modest spec than the current 240Hz panels of this size. Interestingly, this one is promoted as using their latest Penta Tandem QD-OLED technology, and so it looks like there's flexibility to use different OLED stacks depending on requirements. Again, the key spec difference is the lower brightness level, with an expected 400 nits peak for HDR and 200 nits for SDR. Some of the specs are still being finalised, and only MSI have announced a monitor using this new 32-inch QD-OLED Edge panel so far, and it's expected in Q4 at some time. There are also a couple of known planned future QD-OLED panels that we should discuss, but with some specs and details still being finalised. These are also both pending monitor adoption, so no announcements on actual monitors using these yet. We can touch on them though quickly here. In a press release earlier this year, Samsung displayed that they would also be utilising their Penta Tandem panel structure for an updated 49-inch super ultra-wide panel with a 5120 by 1440 resolution, one that hasn't actually been refreshed since 2023. No other specs were revealed at the time, but this should mean that it receives the True Black 500 certification and improved brightness. But other specs, like whether it will have an RGB stripe layout, dual mode support and things like that, are still to be confirmed. All they've said for now is that it should be produced in 2026 at some time. The other known planned panel that has been floating around now for a couple of years was shown in prototype form back at CES 2024 and then on and off at different events since. It's a 27-inch size panel with a 5K resolution, 220 ppi, retina class pixel density, 180Hz refresh rate and True Black 500 certification. It's been in prototype form for ages, pending monitor adoption and announcements, and so other specs like pixel layout, dual mode support and so on are still to be confirmed. It looks though like there'll be eventually both options from WOLED and QD-OLED panels with this spec, so it'll be really interesting to see what monitors get announced using these panels. If it's combined with a 1440p dual mode support with higher refresh rate, these could be an excellent hybrid work and gaming panels like the new wave of 5K LCD monitors that are being launched at the moment. What about 24-inch QD-OLED panels, 39-inch panels, 5K 2K resolution rumours? What about other refreshes of existing options with RGB stripe and the latest Penta Tandem QD-OLED technology. We don't have anything official that we can share with you for any of these at the moment. Nothing has been formally announced, but we're sure that there will continue to be a focus on new options and panel updates from Samsung Display this year. And as soon as we've got anything new that we can share with you, we certainly will. So there you go, that's all the latest panel development news from 2026 since our last updates on the topic earlier in the year. Loads of exciting stuff coming out of COMPUTEX, plenty more to come I'm sure later this year. We're also going to add a database table for all of the different OLED monitor panels on our website soon, so you can keep track of all of them in one place if you want to. We'll link to that below, and in the meantime, if you want to know loads more about the underlying panel technologies, changes over the years, differences between all the generations and so on, do check out our earlier QD-OLED and WOLED videos from this year where we cover that in loads more detail. Finally, if you want to support all of the content that we produce at TFT Central, please consider joining our Patreon as well, where you can get perks like early access to reviews and new articles, and access, of course, to our ICC profile database. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.